all these factors conspire together, I think, to create a very potentially very, very difficult leadership landscape. And what I've observed over years, and what I think I'm observing generally now, is that leaders are trying to find their way through with complexity. They're trying to find their way through these challenges, these opportunities with where I think we're already over-indexed on messaging and empathy and executive presence and all of these things. And I think the real opportunity is for us all as leaders to simplify, to get below the noise, to replace static with signal, to replace incoherence with coherence, and for leaders specifically to understand that their role as leaders, my role as a leader, my primary role, is to create and steward conditions that create clarity.
Okay, I want to welcome to the podcast today, Tony Barr. And I want to give a little bit of the backstory of how Tony and I even came together in this. So we are LinkedIn colleagues. We don't really know each other. This will be our actual first conversation together. But what grabbed my attention was Tony wrote a post on LinkedIn headlined "Why I Write," and then Tony described what drives his writing when he writes about issues in the workplace, when he writes about other things, what drives him. And that grabbed me. But not only did that grab me, then it led me to some of Tony's deeper writing. In fact, he has a white paper that's available to you on LinkedIn, and I'll include in the show notes to this episode how you can get to Tony on LinkedIn and how you can get to those resources and materials. But Tony wrote a white paper on what he calls signal leadership. And again, as I read through it, I thought, here is a true meeting of the minds. We don't know each other, but I feel like I know him, and I know his mindset and his thought process. And I just felt that this was somebody who listeners to Leadership Disrupted would really benefit from and would enjoy listening to. So Tony Barr, I want to welcome you to Leadership Disrupted, and I'm trying not to take away too much. I would love for you to tell us about why you write, about even why you chose to explain to your LinkedIn connections why you write and why you write about what you write and why you write the way you do. And maybe just fill in the gaps in terms of who are you, and then we'll just have a conversation, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dan. Thanks for discovering me on LinkedIn and for connecting with me. I really appreciate your kind words about that first post about why I write, and then the white paper as well. So a few comments about why I write, and then I'll give you a little bit more background on me, because I think that informs my thinking when I write, and my thinking and my practice around leadership. I write because I want to add to the conversation about leadership. There's so much conversation about this. In fact, just one quick anecdote. I took some time off a couple of weeks ago to spend with my wife and our daughter-in-law and granddaughter, who were visiting with us, and we went to a large mall here in New Jersey, and we found ourselves in a bookstore. And I moved to the business section of the bookstore because I was curious, because I am writing now, and this is all kind of on a larger book arc. And I went to the business section and the leadership section specifically within the business section. And by my rough count, there were 300 plus unique titles on business leadership. And I thought to myself, wow, well, the first thought I had was, really, who am I to think that I could add to that pile of books? And then the second thought I had was, there is a lot of noise in this space. I'm not saying that it's not productive input, but there's a lot of noise in that space. And my observation over years of leadership, Dan, and particularly over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years, and I think the pandemic was a real catalyst in this as well, is that we over-index on so many things in leadership. We over-index on messaging, we over-index on volume, meaning not only the quantity of messaging, but also really the volume, literally the volume of messaging. I think we have over-indexed a bit on empathy. Not that empathy isn't important, but I think it has to be purposeful empathy. It's what I call forensic empathy. It's understanding through empathy what's really happening in an organization and happening with people, and how we leverage empathy to help us become a better organization. AI, wow, we could talk for hours about AI and the challenges, the opportunities and the challenges that presents, and how leaders are scratching their heads and saying, we don't really know what to do with this. We think there's a use for AI, et cetera. Political upheaval, cultural differences, if we talk about the United States specifically, a very, very interesting time and a very challenging time, I think, in the history of the United States. And all of these things conspire, all these factors conspire together, I think, to create a very, potentially very, very difficult leadership landscape. And what I've observed over years, and what I think I'm observing generally now, is that leaders are trying to find their way through with complexity. They're trying to find their way through these challenges, these opportunities with where I think we're already over-indexed on messaging and empathy and executive presence and all of these things. And I think the real opportunity is for us all as leaders to simplify, to get below the noise, to replace static with signal, to replace incoherence with coherence, and for leaders specifically to understand that their role as leaders, my role as a leader, my primary role, is to create and steward conditions that create clarity in an organization. And with that clarity then enables us, through virtually any disruption of any kind, to move through it together and not separately. So I didn't wake up one day and say, gee, I need to write, or gee, I'm going to write a book. This is something that's been stirring in me for years. I have had some conversations with my wife in the last 12 months where she said, Tony, you really need to get this book out of you. You need to get these ideas on paper and share these with other people. And so that's why I'm writing now. I don't write to criticize. I write to observe. I'm sharing my observations based on my own experience. I'm sharing my observations based on what I see in other organizations and what I see in the world around me. I'm trying to add to the conversation so that leaders can not only be effective operators, but they can elevate and really be grounded, effective leaders and build things that matter and that survive them as leaders. That's something else that's really important to me as a leader, is building something that survives and is generative when I leave the room, or when I leave the building, or when I leave the profession. A little bit about me professionally. So I have 32 years of professional experience now. About 25, 26 years of that experience have been in leadership positions, increasing responsibility. In my career, I've done virtually everything other than serve as a CFO and serve as a COO. I've had 4 P&L assignments over my career. I've been CMO, I've been CHRO, I've been VP of Corporate Development, I've led mergers and acquisitions. In my current role with my organization here in North America, I lead our shared services business portfolio. That includes people and culture, HR in most organizations, but people and culture in our organization. I have IT and digital transformation. I have quality, health, safety, environment, and continuous improvement. And I have an emerging discipline for us, an intentional and structured discipline around internal corporate communications. As I look back on my career, Dan, even though I've held these various titles, and those titles suggest certain functional stewardships and I hope expertise at some level, if I boil it down, my career has been about building and rebuilding, and taking something that was either really poor and making it rich, or taking something that was good and making it better, and doing that together with teams. And as I said, really focusing maniacally on ensuring that whatever my teams and I did together would survive me, would survive the personality of the leader, and would be truly generative and sustainable.
So what makes you a perfect guest for this podcast is that, number one, you're a real guy with a real job who has had a real career. And what I mean by that is, I have a lot of friends who are speakers, authors, consultants, and they're great people. So I'm not. This is in no way meant as a criticism of any of them. But if you've spent your adult life being a trainer, being a speaker, being a writer, it's a certain perspective that comes to you, and it's kind of a trainer's perspective. It's not, again, this is going to sound critical. It's not, but that's not a real job. That's not a job where you are in the belly of the beast making business work. Um, and so I just have deep respect for people who have real jobs and real work, and then come to this point in their career where they do start to decide, I actually have a point of view that I want to share with others. I think it ends up being a much more richly informed point of view. So that's number one in terms of what makes you perfect for this podcast. But number two is you've arrived at the same conclusion that I arrived at when I began thinking about this a couple of years ago, in terms of what is going on in our world that just seems more chaotic, faster paced. Part of it is the information overload. You mentioned lots of other disruptions, generational, cultural, um, technological, AI, all of those things, and also just this overwhelm of information coming at us every single day. Part of it is our smartphones that are in front of us, around us all the time. But along with smartphones comes, social media and also technology. So we get information overwhelm, misinformation overload. We get data, we get entertainment, we get news, we get marketing, we get all these things. And in this world of so much stuff, we're wondering, why is it hard to find a leader who can create clarity in all of that, from all of that chaos? It takes a lot. It's a lot of mental energy that's required to have a leader who can take all of that and say, I'm going to choose to communicate less. I'm going to say more with fewer words because I'm going to build more into what I'm saying. I'm going to connect more with less time because I'm going to make it more human than you. But those are great words. I mean, what kind of practical, like, as you think about these things, so you and I are thinking about the same things. As you think about these things, what kind of guidance do you give to leaders who say, okay, I get it. I think I get the concept, but how do I go deeper and wider at the same time? How do I be more while also getting my work done, getting all the things that have to happen? Um, what kind of thoughts does that prompt?
Well, I appreciate your kind words about my being a perfect guest for the Leadership Disrupted podcast. I think actually that's probably the first time in my life anybody has ever evaluated me or accused me of being perfect. So
I
thank you.
said oh, yes.
Thank you for that. That's a great question because that's a tough question for leaders to grapple with. It requires a couple of things, I think. Dan, we as leaders really need to strip away a lot of layers of complexity, and that's an intentional. That doesn't happen. Those layers don't fall off just because
Yeah.
we in our heads say, you know what, I need to simplify. There are really some disciplined and very difficult choices that have to be made. I think, and I will probably sound like a broken record because I think we'll probably hit this point a few times in our conversation. But in my mind, one of the most important things, practical things that a leader can do, and maybe it's the most practical thing that a leader can do in order to navigate all of this noise or navigate all of this static around us. So everything that you talked about, Dan, with the information overwhelm and the misinformation overload, and demands on time and needing to connect and do that in a human way. Um, it's a shared ground truth, finding out, really determining what as a leader, what my shared ground truth is going to be with my team, with my organization, and with myself as well. What is my shared ground truth? The thing that I keep coming back to, because if a leader can define that shared ground truth effectively and meaningfully, and by that I mean in a way that really is relevant for the stakeholders to whom the leader is accountable, then that ground truth becomes a guiding path for quite literally every decision that I have to make as a leader, or that my team has to make as individual contributors or leaders of their own teams within the broader team. I think, and my own experience bears this out, I think many leaders, and maybe it's a great majority of leaders, assume that there is a shared ground truth in an organization, in a team, or again, in a broader organization. And I'll give you an example. Early in my career, and this was actually one of the most formative experiences I've had in my career, and foundationally was so important to I didn't realize it at the time, but as I look back, I could see, okay, that was really some building blocks there for me in terms of my leadership thought and leadership practice. I was leading a cross-functional initiative, and we had some really smart people around the table on that initiative, and some good humans as well. So they were really a pleasure to work with. And we would come together and review progress and work through challenges. And it seemed the harder we worked as a team, the more drift we saw in our progress, and the more drift we saw from the outcome that we were looking for. And so one day I said, you know what, let's just pause. Let's not focus on how we had to drive this forward and what needs to get done this week, or what needs to get done this month. Let's just pause that for a minute, and let's table all of our assumptions around what we're doing here. And that exercise revealed that we were operating on many different realities. I saw reality one way. She saw reality one way, not my way. He saw reality one way, not my way, not her way. And that was really what was impeding our progress. And so we said, okay, let's agree on which of these assumptions is foundationally really critical, and let's define. I didn't use the term ground truth at the time, but in effect, I was saying, let's define our ground truth, or let's define what reality really is for us in this initiative. And once we did that, and that wasn't easy. I'm not going to suggest that was something we knocked out in 30 minutes. That was a half a day slogging through that and really having some pointed debate and discussion about, okay, this is an assumption, but it really isn't critical, or even it's flawed with respect to our initiative and what we want to achieve, the outcome we want to deliver here. A half day to slog through that. Hard work, mentally, hard work emotionally, physically exhausting as well. But once we were done with that and went back to the question, okay, what do we need to get done this week? What do we need to get done this month? Everything just started to click for us. And we'd actually fallen behind our projected timeline. We were able to claw back those delays, and really delivered a terrific result for the company and for our customers as well. And if we hadn't done that, we would have arrived somewhere, but it would not have been at the quality that we arrived at. And we would have burned a lot of bridges, and we would have burned out a lot of people getting there. And this is why I say, I think many leaders, if not a great majority, assume there's a shared ground truth, that we have a common reality, and we see things the same way. And it's a very risky assumption to make. And so I always start there with a team, with an organization. Anything is, what is our shared ground truth on this?
That is a profound start, because I can say I've participated in many meetings where someone puts on the agenda for 30 minutes or 20 minutes. Okay, we're going to define our North Star, or we're going to come to a mutual understanding of our business model, or we're going to do a market analysis in a 40-minute meeting, or what, whatever the topic is. Essentially, what they're saying, without even maybe realizing that they're saying it, is we need to discuss this to make sure we all see things the same way, or we agree the lay of the land is this. And then in all of those meetings that are the ones that are coming to mind, there comes a point where you recognize, oh no, we don't see it the same way, or we have different points of view. And the instinct seems to be, well, if we're not agreeing, let's default to whoever is highest on the food chain, whoever is the number one leader. What do you think? What do you see? And unless he or she is very discerning, unless he or she is very committed to, hey, this isn't about you jumping to my vision. This is about a shared, authentically shared vision. That's a pretty rare leader who says, I want to understand, how do you see it? And I'll help you understand how I see it. But then let's go on this journey together to ultimately have some kind of mutual understanding. So were you so this group that you were describing, were you the primary leader of that group?
I was the primary leader of the group.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
what process did you go through to bring out from people sharing their reality?
Well, we started with the definition of the outcome. So we had a deliverable that was, let's say, technically defined, but we said, what does that mean in terms of impact? What does it mean in terms of impact for the company? So we have internal customers for this, and what does that mean in terms of impact for the customer? And that may have been one of the most interesting and one of the more, let's say, profoundly transformative parts of that discussion is really talking about impact, because we had a deliverable. It was a technical deliverable. It was a technical and a service deliverable. But we said, let's humanize this a little bit. And this, I think, is a real power play. When you start to think about things in human terms, and when you start to think about things existentially, what I mean by that, let's go with human and then talk about existential. Whatever my company does, whatever product we produce, whatever service we deliver, whatever we ship, it has an impact on somebody. And that impact either enables them to do something and to amplify impact, or it inhibits them from doing something. And it suppresses their capacity for amplifying impact. When a team begins to think about what we do in terms of human impact, it changes the game completely. Existentially, I asked the team, if we are not able to, after we talked about impact, if we as a team were unable to deliver this kind of impact and sustain this kind of impact, or said differently, if this impact that we deliver disappears from the market, what is the market really missing? And that changes the way you think about what you do and how you do it and why you do it. And that was really, and I'm not going to say that I went into that half-day session with that in mind. That kind of organically emerged, and as it emerged, I'm like, wow, this is really a revelatory moment here. Talking about things this way, looking at things this way, and it was another team member who suggested we look at this particular challenge or this particular deliverable in that project existentially. I thought, wow, this is revelatory, and looking at things this way changes really how we do what we do and why we do it, and it makes it even easier for us to identify that common ground truth when we're talking in terms of human impact. So that was a really critically important piece of that. That it was an experiment at the time, and it worked out well.
I think a leader has to have a very discerning ear for for different understandings. Like because people can use the exact same language, they can be saying the same words, and if you're listening very carefully, you can discern. Oh, you mean when we say customer centricity, I'm thinking this. You're
Right.
actually meaning this. Or when we say, market alignment, or whatever phrases we might use. And then to recognize the dissonance, and then address it in a way that doesn't cause somebody to shrink away, doesn't cause people
Right.
to close up, but in fact facilitates that mutual understanding, or facilitates that willingness to share. So did you find that everybody, like when you had this half day meeting, was everybody sort of equally open and willing to share?
No, it was like any room, Dan. You've got some who were eager to be early adopters, and you have some in the room who are a little bit more skeptical. I was fortunate; those in the room who had the most kind of influence, uh, they kind of jumped on this fairly quickly, and so others saw which way the wind was blowing, and they respected those individuals and said, "Okay, if they're buying into this, then I can buy. It's safe for me to buy into this." And that's okay for that particular initiative, but you want everybody over time to line up in this direction as well. And so those I think there were two of those leaders or influencers in the room who really jumped out in front of this and helped me with it. They led other initiatives themselves later and were able to fertilize this approach, this way of thinking into other parts of the organization and bring others along in perhaps a way that I could not have brought them along because they were being working with on a peer-to-peer level. There's one other thing, one other factor I'd like to add that I think is a success factor here. It's about the leader's mindset. We could talk about the leader's mindset on several dimensions, but one in particular in this context is that it's not the leader's job to be visible. It's the leader's job to ensure that clarity and coherence are visible, and it's the leader's job to steward conditions and to create systems. And by systems, I don't mean just technology, I mean systems, the way we do things. Decisions around what is encouraged, what's discouraged, what's rewarded, what's punished, which ideas live, which ideas die, who gets promoted, why they get promoted, et cetera. It's the leader's job, my job, to steward those conditions so that clarity is inevitable. It's not my job to be visible as the guy with the big title in the room. It's my job to ensure that the conditions are in place so that clarity will not only emerge, but that it will be inevitable, and then letting the others in the room have the space to breathe, to see the signal, to hear the signal, to catch on to it, and then tie every effort, every thought, and every effort to that signal. If I'm doing that well, if I'm creating clarity and coherence, and the conditions are not only spoken but they're lived, then my team or any team can really do fantastic work.
I was facilitating a workshop. This goes back a couple of years ago for a group of senior leaders for a mid to large business, and it was a one-day program on strategic leadership. And what was supposed to be a 2-hour module, there was a 2 hours as part of the opening, was focused on does our culture align with our mission? And so as part of that, essentially, we took them through a process of, well, what is our culture? And then what is our mission? And is there alignment? And as I think back now, it deserved much more time, but we had 2 hours allotted. And in the first part of the discussion, as the group began discussing what the culture is, one of the questions they were meant to answer was, do we have a culture of open and authentic communication? And as people went around the room, the answer was, oh, yes, 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 yes. Essentially, everyone was in violent agreement. Hey, we have an open culture. We get good employee feedback. We listen to the feedback. All good. Like, hey, we're all good here. Oh, okay. So then we take a brief break, and then we move into the next part of that session, which is our culture aligned with our mission? And it just felt a little too neatly packaged to me, because I've facilitated these kind of workshops before, and usually there's some dissonance. There's almost always at least someone who says, well, hold on a second, we have an issue here, or we're not quite perfect here. It felt just a little too perfect. And so during the break, I had a kind of a sidebar conversation with one person, and I said to her, this is fantastic. I don't. It's pretty rare to have an organization where people are just very comfortable sharing exactly what they think and feel, even if it's uncomfortable information. Can you give me an example of when that's happened? And she she couldn't really come up with an example. And then we talked a little bit more, and she kind of opened the door for me to say, well, maybe it's not as perfect as we were saying. And then we had to move on. It was a 1-day training program, tight time schedule. We had to move on. But what I found is that in the breaks and at the lunch, whenever I had a chance to get one-on-one with any of the attendees, I started digging deeper and deeper into that one topic. Do we in fact have an organization culture that fosters open dialogue about uncomfortable situations? By the time we got to the end of that day, and we were complete for that day. Now it's a 2-day program, or it was a 2-day program. I had some time to debrief with the CEO in the early evening, and so I debriefed with him, and I said, his feedback was very positive. We were all on track, and I said, there's just one thing that's really I'm having trouble letting go. He said, I explained to him the point of view that I was hearing, like on these sidebar conversations, and I just said, I get the sense that we need more time in on this topic. We need to have a further discussion on this topic. And so, to his credit, he said, well, let's adjust tomorrow's schedule. So we made some adjustments. We blocked off another 2 hours. And now I came into that session much better informed, essentially forcing them to have some of the uncomfortable dialogue about the actual culture within the organization. What's the on the ground, the frontline culture, not the C-suite culture, but the frontline culture. And over time, they came to agreement that within the C-suite, within their small group, they were all very open with each other. But when it comes to the mid-level and frontline employee organization, there was much less openness. But then I asked, after we got to that point, I said, well, if you as a C-suite are so open with each other, why did it take this? Why are we doing remedial work to talk about the cultural challenges? It took a fair amount of prompting. So are we really as open with each other as we are saying that we are? And my fear was that the CEO was going to shut this down. And to his credit, in fact, he cracked it wide open. And he said, come on, guys, let's talk about this. And he said, and if I'm driving some of this, my bad. But we've got, and so we ended up setting the entire agenda aside and spending a lot of time. I didn't use your language then, but essentially we were making sure we start with a shared vision of what is our culture, what's the reality of our culture.
Right.
And it took a lot of time to come to that willingness to say, here's what's good, here's what's great, but here's the dirty laundry, here's the real dirty laundry. Because if you don't recognize it, if you're never going to wash it, if you don't recognize that it's smelling a little, it just reinforces the point that you're making, is that this is hard work. This isn't just, okay, I read Tony's white paper on signal leadership, and now let's schedule a meeting and we'll spend 40 minutes talking, and we'll come to a shared vision of something. If someone is going to do that, it's going to require some serious work. Does that prompt any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you were mentioning culture and sharing your direct experience with a group, senior leadership group, who were trying to work through culture. Dan, I would tell you that organizational culture is probably one of the least understood facets of organizational being and organizational life. I think everybody wants to talk about culture, and we do. We talk about culture. My experience, direct experience, my observation with other leaders outside of my stewardships, and my observation of other leaders through my reading, is that many leaders, and again, maybe even a large percentage, view culture as an input. And I argue the converse. In my world, culture is an output. It's an emergent property. And I fear that most organizations, most leadership teams see culture as declarative culture. We declare that it is XYZ, whatever XYZ is, and therefore it is XYZ. And you mentioned the culture on the ground, the lived and experienced culture. And we often find that declarative culture is quite different from what our people are living on the ground. And coming back to my proposition that culture is an emergent property, there are systems, there's an architecture in an organization that produces culture as a property, that delivers culture as an output. And it has to do with systems that I touched on in this conversation. What do we encourage? What do we discourage? How is disagreement dealt with? Is it welcomed? Do we say we welcome it, but in fact we punish it, and therefore people don't disagree? People don't really share with us the truth that they see anyway. How are people promoted? Why are they promoted? Does that make sense against the backdrop of an organizational mission, for example, or a shared ground truth? If that architecture is sideways, the culture will be as good as the poorest frame in that architecture. I've heard culture, you and I both, I'm sure, have heard culture defined and described in myriad ways. There are two ways that are really, really practical that I think are super effective. One is that culture is the worst tolerated behavior in an organization. That's your culture, the worst tolerated behavior in the organization. Another definition that I really like is culture is the feeling that I have in my stomach the night before I have to go back. I have to go back to work. This is why I advocate for a heavy systems lens in leadership. Focus on the systems. Focus on the architecture, so that your aspirational culture is not an accident, but it's inevitable. I mean, culture is going to happen no matter what, and you and I both know that. It's a product of system, though. It's not declared. You cannot sloganeer your way into culture. You system your way into culture. You ground truth. You use the ground truth as the foundation, and have systems that are built on that, and reflect coherence of that ground truth. And you live that by your own behavior, decisions, and you hold each other accountable within that system framework. The companies, the organizations that struggle most with culture struggle most with systems, and with their informal and formal architectures on how things are done and why they're done. And once you begin to think about the idea that culture is an emergent property, it's an output and not an input, then I think that begins to expand your thinking in a very even radical, productively radical way. And you get serious about the stuff that really matters, and you focus less on communicating more about your culture. You focus less on the sound bites and the buzzwords, and more on the systems. And this goes back to what I said about a leader's job being not to be visible, but to ensure that clarity emerges, that there's coherence in place of incoherence, so that whatever we want our culture to be, our systems will support, because there's clarity there to support that.
I'm going to ask you a tough, it might be a tough question. How do you have any success in helping leaders who don't currently think deeply enough about this, in helping them think a bit more deeply? Because as you're talking, I'm recounting in my head specific examples of leaders who, if I were to ask them, hey, do you have a culture of open communication? They would say absolutely. If you were to ask them, on at first glance, They think their culture is great. They think, oh, our culture is aligned with our mission. You ask any employee, what's our mission statement? They'll tell you what our mission statement is.
Right.
They will be able to point to evidence that we're very culturally aligned as an organization. But in fact, I know the reality that they are not. And I think for many of them, they just don't think about it enough. Maybe they're not suspicious enough. Maybe they're not maybe they're just not paying attention. They're focused on KPIs or OKRs or getting
Right.
projects done or getting whatever. And they're not just taking that deep breath and watching just how is everybody acting? How is everybody behaving?
Sure.
What's the reality of our culture? And I'll share one more example, and then I'll go back to you. I had a situation where an employee, not who worked for me, but who worked for a colleague, her position was eliminated, or at least that's what I was told. I was told her position was eliminated. And then in some other meeting, we were discussing a number of things, and then I heard that she had resigned. And then other meetings, a couple weeks goes by, and then I heard that she decided to go back to school. So I heard like three different stories, and I'm wondering, well, what actually happened? Because I knew her, and I found value in her, and because she and I were connected on LinkedIn, I decided, okay, I'm hearing like three different stories. I'm just going to call her, and I like her anyway, so I just want to just say, are you okay? How's life? So I call her. And we're having a conversation. I'm being very careful about not throwing anybody under the bus, not criticizing anybody. But then I did ask her, so why did it not work out? And she said the most fascinating thing. She said, I don't know. I don't know. Here's what I was told. And her version was a fourth version. And I we finished the conversation, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to practice what I preach. I'm going to go back to the original leader who let her go, and I'm just going to ask him. So what was the thinking behind that, and the thinking behind the communication? Long story short, I got a very muddled explanation. No accountability, no clarity. And at that point, I backed away. I just said, okay, I don't know that there's anything I can do about this, but this is our culture. This is whether no one would want to hold that up and say, hey, we're really proud of this, but this is in fact the culture within the organization. And the biggest lesson for me was that senior leaders at my level and above don't really get it, but everyone at her level got it. I mean, all of her friends, everybody's heard the story. Everybody knows the reality. It's like they've got a microscope on all of these leadership behaviors. And I think as leaders, we sometimes don't realize that we are under the microscope. They are watching, and we think we can tap dance. We think we can play a happy song and tap dance our way through. And because everybody's kind of grooving to our beat, oh yeah, it must be okay. But in fact, no, they are seeing their on the ground reality, and they're seeing what the real culture is. So I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a rant, but
Rant or not, it resonates with me because I've seen the same thing at different periods in my career, and so a couple of things, Dan, to answer your first question directly. Do I have success in helping leaders kind of swing this way? I have success, and I have moments where there was no success as well. And where I've been successful, there has been something in the leader that changed in order for me and for us together to be successful. I think long gone are the days when a leader had to have all the answers. But I think many leaders still believe they have to have all the answers. They daily don what I would refer to as the costume of leadership, what they think they're supposed to look like, and what they're supposed to focus on, which I mean, they do have, in a for-profit organization anyway, they have fiscal accountability, and they have to we have to keep our commitments to boards and other stakeholders as well. But a great leader doesn't have all the answers, and an even greater leader, if that's grammatically correct, knows that they don't have all the answers and accepts that it's okay not to have all the answers. They know that what they need to do is to create clarity, and what you've taught, your experience that you shared with your professional colleague and their experience in that organization, and 4 versions of the truth, and that really reflecting the culture. That rings is completely true as a reflection of culture. It is what we see in the mirror. It's not what we declare. It's what we see in the mirror. Now, serendipity arrives when what we see in the mirror aligns with what we declare. Right. But it's not what we declare. So that mindset change has to happen in a leader. It's okay that I don't have all the answers. And my job is not to have all the answers. My job is to surround myself with terrific talent who bring various answers, and we can have conversations about those answers, and we can decide together how we're going to move forward. But my job is to create clarity and to create conditions and to steward the conditions where people know that it is okay to come forward with an answer. It's okay. In fact, it's expected. It's encouraged that they come forward and with their ideas and to challenge my ideas and the ideas of others. Where that's happened, I've had success. All leaders have egos. You and I have egos, Dan. Although you impress me as someone who really keeps theirs in check. I admire that, and I like to think that I keep mine in check. But we all have egos, and for some leaders, it's a mission impossible for them to say, "I don't know everything," and it's okay that I don't know everything. And my job instead of being that guy who's always visible and knows everything and says everything, my job instead is to create clarity and to steward conditions. That's a critical mindset shift that has to happen.
So I'm going to connect a couple of things because I wrote this down when you said it. Reality is not what we declare. That's a profound sentence because so many leaders, they will declare, I declare an open environment or an environment of open communication. And because they've declared it, they believe it is so. Are you a fan of The Office, the television series The Office?
Absolutely, yes.
So you'll perhaps remember the scene where Michael comes out and he says, I declare bankruptcy. Yes. So just because you declare that we are a certain way, and just because nobody raises their hand to oppose you, that doesn't mean it's reality. And then, so secondly, then, if we're not paying attention to what the reality is, we as leaders can persuade ourselves, well, it must be so then. It is what I have said. And more often than not, maybe it's not so much what we declare it to be. And I think if I were to exhort to any leader, any specific thing, it would be to be self-doubting a bit, be self-questioning a bit, be hard on yourself because other people won't be hard on you. Once you reach certain levels of leadership, people don't come to you to say, that keynote speech is kind of a flat one. That joke didn't really land well. That new strategy of yours, it's kind of like the strategy of 3 years ago, or that's our competitor's strategy from 3 years ago, or that people won't be hard on you because you have a certain amount of control now over them. So then you have to be hard on yourself. You have to be willing to say, is that actually great? Is it? And so I want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up close to the end of our agreed upon time. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to make sure that in the episode notes, we include the link to your LinkedIn profile and to your Signal Leadership white paper, and probably to that initial posting as well. I'm going to find the link to that, include that.
Thank you.
And I am thinking, Tony, this is the start of something. This is the start of a conversation. This does not feel like the end. This feels like,
I
okay,
hope not.
we're gonna chew on this. I know I'm gonna chew on it, and have you back and have a further dialogue, and maybe we can find some area where we disagree. But right now, it's all feeling like we're in complete alignment.
I'll tell you what, Dan, if each of us practices introspective curiosity, I'm sure we will find an area where we disagree. But I'm sure we'll have a great conversation about that.
And I'm thinking next time, let's talk more about how leaders can be hard on their own thinking. Like how, because it is an area where I struggle, but I know a lot of leaders struggle. Is okay. I want to be a deeper thinker. I want to be less ego driven, but maybe could use some coaching or direction to how do I question myself without just flagellating myself, without just beating up on myself. How do I literally question my own thinking and think about my own thinking in a way that's productive? I know there are a lot of people who would benefit from that. So
I
we'll talk.
love that question, and would welcome the opportunity to have that discussion with you.
Fantastic. So Tony, thank you so much. We'll connect again soon. And I know people are going to love to be hearing from you on the Leadership Disrupted podcast. So
An absolute pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having me.